My name is Daniel, and I watched my father destroy our family without a single backward glance. For 28 years, my parents had what I thought was a good marriage. My mom, Eleanor, supported my dad, Richard, through medical school, working multiple jobs to pay the bills while raising me and my younger sister, Melissa. When he finally established his successful cardiology practice, my mom was the one who managed their social calendar, hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, and created the perfect home that he was always too busy to appreciate. I had just turned 25 when everything fell apart. It started with late nights at the office, missed family dinners, and weekend conferences that hadn't existed before. My mom noticed the signs, but chose to believe his excuses. She trusted him completely. I was the one who saw him first. I was home visiting from graduate school, meeting a friend for lunch downtown, and there was my father sitting at a corner table in an upscale restaurant, holding hands with a woman who couldn't have been older than 30. The way they looked at each other, the intimate gestures, the familiarity, it was unmistakable. This wasn't a colleague or a patient. This was something else entirely. I didn't confront him. I didn't walk over to their table and make a scene. Instead, I took a photo with my phone and left before he could see me. Then I drove straight home to my mother. Looking back, I wish I had found a gentler way to tell her. But I was angry, furious at my father for what he was doing, for the lies he was telling, for the pain he was about to cause. I showed her the photo, watched her face crumple as the realization hit her, and held her as she cried. "Maybe there's an explanation," she said through her tears, always willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. "Maybe it's not what it looks like." But we both knew what it was, and when my father came home that night, the confrontation was inevitable. He didn't even try to deny it. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I was going to tell you this weekend." "Tell me what?" my mother asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm in love with someone else," he said. "Her name is Vanessa. We've been seeing each other for 8 months. 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of betrayal. 8 months of making a fool of my mother while he built a life with someone else. I want a divorce," he continued, as if he were discussing something as mundane as the weather. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." My mother sat there, stunned into silence. I was the one who found my voice. "How could you do this?" I demanded. "After everything Mom has done for you, after 28 years of marriage." He looked at me, irritation flashing across his face. "This doesn't concern you, Daniel. This is between your mother and me." "Like hell it doesn't concern me," I shot back. "This affects all of us. Me, Melissa, Mom, the entire family you're walking out on." He sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "People fall out of love. It happens. I've given your mother the best years of my life, but now I want something different. I deserve to be happy." "And Mom doesn't?" I asked incredulously. "She deserves to be abandoned after standing by you all these years?" He brushed off my concerns with a cold efficiency that I would come to recognize as his new normal. "Your mother will be fine. I'll make sure she's taken care of financially." But that wasn't the point, and he knew it. It wasn't about money. It was about respect, loyalty, commitment. All the things he was casually discarding after nearly 3 decades of marriage. That night, he packed a suitcase and left, just like that. 28 years of marriage ended with the quiet click of our front door. My mother was devastated, heartbroken, doesn't even begin to describe it. She had built her entire life around my father, around their marriage, around the family they had created together, and now, approaching 60, she was being cast aside for a younger woman who hadn't been there for the struggles, who hadn't supported him through the lean years, who knew only the successful, established doctor he had become, largely thanks to my mother's sacrifices. The weeks that followed were a blur of tears, sleepless nights, and uncertainty. My mom lost weight rapidly, her clothes hanging off her frame. She stopped seeing friends, stopped going to her book club, stopped doing all the things that had once brought her joy. It was as if, without my father, she didn't know who she was anymore. I took a leave of absence from graduate school to stay with her. I couldn't bear the thought of her alone in that big house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. My sister Melissa flew in from Chicago, where she was working as a nurse, but she could only stay for a week before she had to return to her job. Meanwhile, my father seemed to be thriving in his new life. He moved in with Vanessa almost immediately into a sleek downtown apartment that looked like something from a magazine spread. He bought a new car, a sports car, the kind of midlife crisis cliché that would have embarrassed him a year earlier. He and Vanessa took weekend trips to Napa, to New York, to the Caribbean, all documented on social media for everyone to see. He made no effort to hide his relationship, no attempt to be discreet out of respect for my mother's feelings. If anything, he seemed eager to show off his younger girlfriend, as if she were a trophy he had won. He brought her to his office parties, to medical fundraisers, to all the places where he would inevitably run into colleagues and friends who knew my mother. And Vanessa? She was everything my mother wasn't. Young, flashy, attention-seeking. Where my mother had been content to stay in the background, supporting my father's career from behind the scenes, Vanessa wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged as the new woman in Richard Mitchell's life. It was at a charity gala 3 months after he left that I saw them together for the first time. I was there representing my mother, who had been on the planning committee for years but couldn't face attending now. They walked in like they owned the place, my father in a tuxedo, Vanessa in a low-cut red dress that drew every eye in the room. When they spotted me, my father had the decency to look uncomfortable. He approached me cautiously, Vanessa clinging to his arm. "Daniel," he said, his tone forcedly casual. "Good to see you. How's your mother?" "How do you think she is?" I replied coldly. "She's devastated, but I'm sure that doesn't keep you up at night." He frowned. "I understand you're upset, but there's no need for hostility. I'm still your father." "Are you?" I asked, because the father I knew wouldn't have abandoned his family for... I glanced at Vanessa, who was watching our exchange with poorly concealed interest. "For his midlife crisis?" Vanessa's face hardened. "You don't know anything about our relationship," she said, her voice brittle. "Your father and I love each other." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Love? Is that what you call it? He left a 28-year marriage for you. What makes you think he won't do the same to you when someone younger comes along?" My father gripped my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. "That's enough," he hissed. "You're making a scene." I shook off his hand. "No, Dad. You're the one who made a scene. You're the one who threw away everything for this." I gestured between them. "I hope it's worth it." I walked away then, my heart pounding. I'd never spoken to my father that way before, never confronted him so directly. It felt both terrifying and liberating. But that confrontation, as satisfying as it was in the moment, did nothing to change the situation. My father was still leaving my mother. He was still planning to divorce her, and based on the conversations I'd overheard between him and his lawyer, he was planning to give her as little as possible in the settlement. That's when I decided if my father wanted to destroy our family, I would make sure it cost him everything. I started by encouraging my mother to fight for what she deserved. She was reluctant at first, still hoping for a reconciliation, still believing that the man she had loved for nearly 3 decades would come to his senses. "I don't want to drag things out," she told me. "I just want it to be over." "It will be over," I assured her. "But not until you get what you're entitled to. You gave up your career to support him. You raised his children. You created the home and the life that allowed him to become successful. You deserve half of everything." With gentle persistence, I convinced her to hire Karen Lawson, one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. Karen was known for her aggressive approach and her unwavering commitment to her clients. She was also known for taking down powerful men who thought they could discard their wives with minimal consequence. Karen immediately recognized what my father was doing, the classic maneuver of a wealthy spouse trying to hide assets before a divorce. She advised my mother to gather as much financial information as possible to document everything she could about their marital assets. That's where I came in. As their son, I had access to information that an attorney might struggle to obtain. I knew about the safe in my father's home office where he kept important documents. I knew the passwords to his personal email account, which he'd never bothered to change because he never thought anyone would need to access it. I knew about the properties he had invested in over the years, the offshore accounts he thought no one knew about, the cash he kept hidden for emergencies. And most importantly, I knew about the private practice he had established with 2 other cardiologists, a practice that was worth millions, but that he was planning to undervalue significantly in the divorce proceedings. Over the next few weeks, I gathered evidence methodically. I made copies of financial statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. I documented the lifestyle my parents had lived together, the vacations, the country club membership, the art collection my father had insisted they invest in. I compiled everything that showed the true extent of their marital assets. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered emails between my father and his business partners, discussing a plan to sell the practice to a healthcare conglomerate, a deal that would net each partner several $1,000,000, a deal that was set to close 3 months after his divorce was finalized. It was calculated deliberate fraud. He was planning to hide the impending sale from my mother and her attorney, to claim that the practice was worth a fraction of what he knew it would sell for. He was planning to cheat her out of millions. I forwarded all the emails to Karen Lawson along with a detailed explanation of what they meant. Her response was immediate. "This changes everything. Your mother needs to see this." I was there when Karen showed the emails to my mother. I watched as confusion gave way to understanding and then to a cold anger I had never seen in her before. "He was going to lie to me," she said quietly. "After everything, he was going to lie to me about this, too." Karen nodded grimly. "This is fraud, Eleanor. He's deliberately concealing assets to prevent you from receiving your fair share. With this evidence, we can ask the court for not just 50% of the known assets, but punitive damages as well." My mother looked at me, then back at Karen. "Do it," she said, her voice stronger than I had heard it in months. "Everything you can." The legal battle that followed was brutal. My father, once he realized what we had discovered, tried every tactic to discredit the evidence. He claimed the emails were taken out of context. He accused me of hacking into his account illegally. He even tried to paint my mother as unstable, claiming she was bitter and vindictive and willing to destroy his reputation out of spite. But the evidence was irrefutable. The emails were clear, the fraud was blatant, and as Karen dug deeper, she uncovered even more attempts by my father to hide assets, from undervaluing real estate holdings to loaning money to friends that was meant to be returned after the divorce was finalized. Through it all, my father never once apologized. He never acknowledged the pain he had caused, the trust he had broken, the family he had fractured. Instead, he became increasingly hostile, blaming my mother, blaming me, blaming everyone but himself for the situation he had created. Vanessa stood by him, at least initially. She played the supportive girlfriend role to perfection, attending every court hearing, holding his hand, glaring at my mother across the courtroom. But as the case dragged on, as more and more of my father's deceptions came to light, I noticed a change in her. The adoring gazes became less frequent. The social media posts about their perfect relationship slowed, then stopped entirely. And then, 6 months into the legal battle, she left him, packed her things and moved out of the sleek downtown apartment while he was at work. She didn't leave a note, didn't offer an explanation, just disappeared from his life as quickly as she had entered it. My father was devastated, not just because he had lost Vanessa, but because he had lost everything else, too. His reputation was in tatters. His partners, concerned about the negative publicity surrounding the case, bought him out of the practice for a fraction of what he would have received from the healthcare conglomerate. The deal he had hoped to hide from my mother fell through entirely. When the divorce was finally settled, my mother received more than half of their assets. The judge, disgusted by my father's attempts to hide money and lie to the court, awarded her additional punitive damages. She got the house, the majority of their investment portfolio, and ongoing alimony that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. My father was left with enough to live comfortably, but nowhere near the wealth he had accumulated over his career. He moved into a small condo, sold the sports car, retreated from the social circles where he had once been a respected figure. The day the divorce was finalized, my mother and I went out to dinner to celebrate. Not the end of her marriage, she would never celebrate that, but the beginning of her new life. A life where she was financially secure, where she was free from the manipulation and lies of a man who had never truly valued her. "I couldn't have done this without you," she told me, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You gave me the strength to fight when all I wanted to do was give up." "You've always been stronger than you know," I replied. "Dad never saw that. He never appreciated what he had." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in a long time. "His loss," she said simply. 2 years have passed since then. My mother has flourished in ways none of us expected. She went back to school, finishing the degree she had abandoned to support my father through medical school. She renovated the house, making it truly hers for the first time. She even started dating recently, nothing serious, just dinner with a kind widower she met at her book club. My father's life took a different trajectory. The medical board investigation triggered by the divorce proceedings uncovered ethical violations in his practice, nothing that cost him his license, but enough to further damage his professional standing. He lost friends, colleagues, the respect of the community. He tried reaching out to Vanessa multiple times, but she never responded. Last I heard, she was engaged to a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco. As for our relationship, it's complicated. We speak occasionally, usually on holidays or birthdays. He's apologized in his way, though his apologies focus more on the damage to his own life than on the pain he caused others. He's bitter about the divorce settlement, convinced that my mother and I conspired to ruin him. He doesn't understand, even now, that he ruined himself, that every loss, every consequence was the direct result of his own choices. That when he walked out on our family, when he decided that his happiness was more important than his commitments, he set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately cost him everything. I don't regret my role in all of this. I don't regret helping my mother fight for what she deserved. I don't regret exposing my father's attempts to cheat her out of her fair share. Some might say I went too far, that I was vindictive, that I should have stayed out of my parents' divorce. But this wasn't just about their marriage. This was about justice, about holding someone accountable for the pain they inflicted, about ensuring that the person who destroyed a family didn't get to walk away unscathed, didn't get to enjoy the fruits of a life built on someone else's sacrifices. My father chose to leave. He chose to lie. He chose to cheat, both on my mother and in the divorce proceedings. And in the end, those choices cost him everything. His girlfriend, his practice, his reputation, his wealth. Some would call it karma. I call it consequences. Well-deserved consequences for a man who thought he could discard 28 years of marriage and start over with a clean slate. Life doesn't work that way. Actions have repercussions. Betrayal has a price. And sometimes, when the universe fails to extract that price on its own, a son who loves his mother has to step in and make sure justice is served. My father left my mother for a younger woman, thinking he could start fresh without consequences. He was wrong, and I made sure of it.